Welcome, everyone. My name is Patrick Mello. I'm the chair of the ISA Dissertation Completion Fellowship, and I'm here with my colleagues, Holly Hansen, who joined us spontaneously. So she's also here, but her name is on the next slide, I think, and Sam Opondo. So the three of us represent the Dissertation Completion Fellowship Committee of ISA, and I'm going to walk you through the presentation of the fellowship, what the fellowship is, what the criteria are, and at the end, after roughly 8-9 slides, there's also the opportunity to discuss questions that you may have. So you're welcome to join us here. So first, let me say a few words about the purpose of the Dissertation Completion Fellowship. Then introduce you to the members of the committee who decide about the applications, the call for applications itself, the eligibility criteria, and the application materials that you should submit. So what is now called the Dissertation Completion Fellowship was the Rosenau Fellowship before. So it replaced this, I think, in 2020. And before this, ISA had a postdoc fellowship, and this was turned into a dissertation completion fellowship. So if you're curious why that came about, that's for how long we have had this. And the aim is to support students, PhD students, in typically the late stage of their PhD program, roughly the final 2 years, to help offset costs incurred through research and writing broadly conceived, and any activities necessary for the successful completion of the dissertation. That's the aim of the fellowship. It's open to all applicants from the social sciences and humanities, also broadly conceived, in the field of international studies. So that link has to be there. There has to be a linkage to international studies. It's open to all eligible graduate students who are also members of the ISA, but the committee particularly encourage applications from groups, genders, and nationalities that have been historically underrepresented in the field of international studies, also broadly conceived. So this is also up to you how you frame this, how you see your eligibility in relation to this criterion. The fellowship is up to $5,000 to cover expenses related to the costs of carrying out your dissertation research and writing, and also to cover other costs that are in relation to that. It can also be less than that if you indicate that there's no need for $5,000, then it can also be less, but that's up to the committee. But clearly, financial need is an important criterion. We will also come to that later. So this should be highlighted in your materials. The committee has been appointed by the ISA governor and governance, and it's a standing committee of ISA. All the members are there for a 2-year term. I'm currently chair of this committee, together with my colleagues Holly Hansen, who's here, Sam Opondo, Olivia Omorueva, Ruta Silva, and Alexander Barda, who couldn't be here, but they also sent their regards. And of course, they're members of the committee and will also assess the applications. You can find all the information about the committee on the ISA link that you see at the bottom. The call for applications, that's the reason why we have this webinar. So the current call opens formally on July 1st. So the information is already there. You can go to the URL that you see here, Committees, Dissertation Fellowship Call. That's the updated call for applications. So if you looked at the previous version, please check the current version out. There have been some small changes in the wording of the application materials and the requirements. And the applications open on July 1st. The process is a bit, a two-step process, so to speak. You have to email a letter of intent to fellowship@isanet.org. And once you do that, you can obtain a secure link. This will be sent to you, and then you can submit your materials online. And the deadline for that is September 1st, so there's a lot of time until then. But make sure that you write to the email address. And the letter of intent is also sometimes a question of what is a letter of intent. Basically, I take it that you need to submit a file for this, but it's a formal letter. You don't need to go into the details of why you need this fellowship and so forth. That's for the application materials later, but you should express your intent of applying for this, and of course your full name and your institutional affiliation and so forth. And then you will be given this secure link. Okay. What are the eligibility criteria for the fellowship? It is important that you have to be a doctoral candidate or equivalent. So you have to have this PhD student, PhD researcher status from your institution by the time the award is received. So sometimes people are in the process of getting this acknowledgement. That's fine, but by the time you would get the award, then you would have to have proof of this status. You must work in the field of international studies, broadly conceived. As I mentioned previously, preference will be given to applicants from underrepresented groups within ISA, and the committee will prioritize proposals from applicants with financial need. So these are the two important criteria that you should meet, and you can make your case why you think your application meets these needs. Applicants should identify all current sources of funding, clearly identify funding shortfalls, to make it easy for the committee to identify the financial need. Funds must be expended in a single calendar year. This runs from January 1st to December 31st. And the fiscal year runs until September 1st. That's the next point. So if you get the fellowship, you should submit a 500-word final report to the committee chair up until September 1st of the following year, where you describe what you did with the funds and how it supported your dissertation completion. The committee reserves the right to redistribute the funds to other applicants at their sole discretion in cases where additional funding has been received since acceptance. So that's also possible. What are the application materials? The most important point, what do you need to submit on the website once you got this secure link? You should describe your dissertation project. That's also a large part of the assessment, whether it's a good quality PhD research project in 1,000 to 1,500 words. So I guess that's typically in the range of plus minus 3 pages where you describe your dissertation project. Then there should be a one-page statement detailing all financial support that you received through your PhD program, for instance, from institutional sources or granting agencies, and also a statement of financial need. So this is one document where you describe the financial support you received or you did not receive or that ended, and you indicate your financial need. At the time of the disbursement of funds, a student must disclose any further funding received after the time of acceptance. So that's also important that you are transparent about this. Then there's a one-page narrative budget that details the different kinds of expenses foreseen and justifies how funding for these expenses will advance your dissertation completion. So that's another one-page document, and there should be a current CV. Here there's no limitation in terms of page numbers, but typically from previous years, these are relatively short CVs. So something like 1, 2, 3 pages, not like very long academic CVs with dozens of pages. And there should be a letter of recommendation from the dissertation's major advisor. So it does not have to be the supervisor or the one supervisor, but a major advisor who can speak about your PhD project and about yourself. And this should indicate the merit and the institutional support or lack thereof of the candidate. So that's important, that it's not just a general letter of recommendation, but it's a letter of recommendation for this fellowship, right? So if you can convey that to those who would support you with a letter, that would be great. And all of these materials you need to submit by December 1 or on December 1 at the very latest through this link that you receive. How is all of this assessed? This work is done by the committee members. So we read all of the submissions that we get, and at least 2 committee members evaluate each submission. And the 3 important criteria that will be checked. First of all, it will be checked whether you meet the eligibility criteria, obviously. But if that's the case, then your submission will be assessed on the basis of the quality of your PhD project. So that's 40% of the points that we assign. The fit with the purpose of the fellowship, 30%. And finally, the financial need, another 30%. Often the question comes up, what's the success rate for this fellowship? It depends very much on the number of submissions we get. So I checked the last 3 years, and this ranged between 10% and 47%, and in between it was 26. So it really depends a lot on how many people apply for this. There are limited funds for this program, ISA program. So it really depends on how many people apply and how many people are eligible. This influences the success rate, obviously. Yes, you can find all of the information about this on the URL that is provided here, the dissertation fellowship, the call. It's a bit more detailed on the website. I tried to summarize these points. So when it comes down to it, have a look at what it says on the website in terms of the eligibility criteria, what you need to submit, how long the document should be, and all those things. That should be the authoritative source. But I can imagine that there are questions, and therefore, yeah, we can now take a Q&A. So you can write your questions, I think, in the chat, or in the question Q&A section here, and then Holly, Sam, and I can have a look at that and address these questions in turn. So I'll stop sharing and let's see. Okay. So there's some questions coming up now. Are we able to apply for expected to defend the dissertation in May 2025? Okay, so that would mean that, I mean, by the time of the completion, you would not be a PhD candidate anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what I could imagine, I mean, this obviously depends a bit on the program. So sometimes then you defended your thesis, but you haven't published it, and you still need to write it up or publish it. I would say, but this is my take now, without knowing anything further on this case. If it can be justified that based on your PhD research, you still require funding and you are still have the financial need, and this goes towards publishing your research or completing your PhD, then I think you should be eligible to still apply for this, even if you defend it earlier. But I'm not sure what Sam and Holly think about this case.
Dan put a on, and that they meant 2026, not 2025.
Okay. Well, then of course you are eligible. Yeah.
Just according to the guidelines, it's for dissertation completion. So if the dissertation is already completed, in that, as you're saying, if it's the May 2025, that will be we cannot assess the retroactively. So the status, as was stated in the eligibility criteria, is for you should be a PhD candidate, in the state of completing the dissertation.
Yeah. I could imagine that. I mean, in some PhD programs, after the defense, you have to do revisions in order to publish or to really complete your PhD. And that would be a case where you might have had the defense, but then you still need to do some work on your dissertation in order to really obtain the PhD. And I think under those circumstances, you would clearly be eligible to apply for this if you also fulfill the other criteria, even if you defend it already, right? But this depends on the program, and you would have the opportunity to justify this in your letters and in your materials, why you believe that you are still eligible for this program. Living expenses can be included, the part of this. So this is your budget, but of course it should be clear that this contributes to the completion of the dissertation. But your personal circumstances influence this as well. So, for instance, childcare or other aspects are also part of the bigger equation here. What else do we have? It can be used, so the funding can be used for field trips if they are related to your research. Yes, there was another question. Does the existence of an additional funding source decrease the possibility of acceptance? Well, yes and no. If you have additional funding, that's good, but probably this means that you have less of a financial need. But it may be that you still are in financial need, even despite this other funding source. So it would be up to you to make this transparent why you still believe that it's needed for your research.
If I can add something about the additional funding source, in the narrative budget, you should be able to indicate any shortfall. So if you have additional funding, but there is a significant shortfall, to be able to demonstrate that, because it helps the committee assess that financial need.
Yeah, great. Other questions? Holly, Sam, feel free to jump in if you see a question that I haven't seen. So
Yeah, I think that there's some questions both on the Q&A and the chat.
okay.
I mean, if you want, does this help us if like one of us maybe ask you the questions? With that way you can worry about answering everything and then we can worry about managing the rooms for you?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know, Sam, if you wanted to take maybe the Q&As and I could do the webinar chat. So
that's okay. Since we began with the Q&A, we could just stay with that and then we move to the webinar. Is that the chat? Is that okay?
Works for me. Yeah.
All right. So there is a question here about asking, usually the fellowship is for one person only, or is it usually distributed for more than one? That isn't, the question isn't very clear, but we've spoken about this, the success rate. Yeah, so the fellowship is actually given to multiple people.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so I think for the Rosenau Fellowship singular was a fellowship, a larger fellowship, and this has been split into several dissertation completion fellowships. So if I understand it correctly, okay.
Okay, there's someone here asking about the letter of intent. Should I email the letter of intent by July 1st, or can it be by September 1st?
September 1st would be too late because you still need to get the link. So you can email for the letter of intent by starting July 1st. So I think you can already send an email there, but officially the call opens on July 1st. And then you have plenty of time between July and September to process your application and submit the application.
All right. I'll ask just one more question. There are a few coming in so that we can turn to the webinar questions. But this is a question of region. And they ask, is there any preference in terms of where the applicant is doing their PhD? For instance, US versus other parts of the world?
No. The short answer is no. There's no preference, there's no agenda where this research is supposed to happen. If it matters to your PhD project and your PhD project is in international studies, well, it doesn't matter.
Over to you, Holly.
Yeah. So we had a few questions. The first one is there any preference in terms of where the app, so we had the same PhD question. What distinguishes a successful proposal? There's a series of related questions. What distinguishes a successful proposal? How specific should they be in the budget justification? There's a few other questions, but I think that that's enough to tackle at the moment, and then we can go back to the rest.
Holly, you also have experience with this, so feel free to weigh in on successful proposals. I think you have limited space for a reason, because we have so many applicants, and therefore you have, for most of these documents, you have one page to do this. So make your case clearly, but also in a detailed manner. Focus on the relevant parts, financial need, institutional support, your project, also be specific about what your PhD project aims to do. All of this helps the committee to form a judgment of the merit of your application. And I think the better you do this, then the more successful you will be.
Yeah, I would say that when I was looking at reviewing the proposals these last couple of years, the main things that I was looking for was filling out our checklist, but I would say beyond that, like the point distribution, that you should make sure that you're addressing those points. It's very, when you think about the field of international studies, there's a lot of people with different methodologies, different fields, making sure that you're avoiding too much jargon so it's easy to understand. For people from these different fields, I thought was really important for communicating the project effectively. Because if it got too jargony, it was very difficult for me to assess the quality of the application, especially if it was not in a field that I was familiar with. I think that the other things was really to communicate what specific financial need was there, like where were the gaps in the budget for the particular student. And then, so that was the main things I would say, being very clear and maybe writing to a more broad academic audience than a field specific one. And then the second one would be being very clear on what funding was available versus where they were struggling financially. So that would be the things that I would add.
Yeah. I think sometimes it was difficult to if people already have some kind of funding, and it just comes across, okay, it would be nice to have more funding, then it's difficult for the committee to make a case that this is really a worthwhile project to support. But sometimes there were cases where people already had funding, but they really needed funding for important field trips or parts of their research. And it just had a financial shortfall and needed this. So you can make the case, but then you need to be very clear about this.
So this is a whole long line of, I think we had the specificity in the budget justification. How specific should they be?
Within the limits of the one-page statements. Is this about the narrative budget, or?
It wasn't clear, but I'm guessing it's the name of the budget. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Since this is also limited, of course, you cannot go into all of the details, but the broad contours of your project and the financial need and the areas where the finance will go through should be clear.
The questions was, what should the advisor's letter emphasize? I think that you had mentioned that previously, but maybe restating that would be handy.
Of course, it's good to hear from the supervisor or your major advisor about the background to the research that you're doing. And if they can say, well, my PhD student wants to do this field research and he or she planned to do this kind of research and is now facing this financially difficult situation because there was no institutional support anymore, and so forth, and really narrate that, this financial need and the merit of the project. That will be very helpful to hear also from the advisor. So about the particular circumstances you're in, why you're applying for this fellowship.
Okay. Another related question is, does the committee take past ISA involvement or awards into consideration when evaluating candidates, or is the application judged entirely on the submitted materials?
The latter. So there's it doesn't feature into the decision making whether you have been involved. I guess it would be nice, but no. No, it's not part of the assessment. You need to be an ISA member, but it doesn't matter whether or not you have been active at ISA before. Yeah.
Okay, and then one final question, then we can go back to maybe just go back and forth between this and the Q&A. Would the fact that I'm a fully funded PhD candidate affect my margin of consideration for the fellowship award?
Yeah, define fully funded. Yes, to some extent, of course. If you're competing with people who have absolutely no funding for their PhD project, and you're already fully funded, you have a harder task to justify why you need this additional funding. But maybe you can make the case, and because of the circumstances of the research that you're doing and so forth. So it's not impossible, but I think it would make it more difficult to justify this. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Holly and Patrick. The two related questions, because they're budgetary questions. And the first is, can I use the funding to hire undergrad research assistants to code data sets? And then second, what if the need goes a little over $5,000? Should we from the budget such that it falls within the $5,000, restricted up to $5,000?
So what we can assign is a maximum of $5,000. So if there's a need for more than that, which goes a little over, then I don't think that should be a problem. I mean, you could be awarded the $5,000 and then that's that. Of course, if it's much higher, then it also prompts the question how realistic this is and so forth. But I think, I mean, from the perspective of the submission, just be transparent about the actual need. I mean, don't try to adapt the number so that it meets the fellowship. Just provide the actual need and make it transparent, and then the committee can make a decision about that question. Yeah. The other question I found a bit tricky about the undergrad RAs. I think in that case, actually, I think that's another case where it's really helpful to have a letter from a major supervisor, a major advisor, and to say, well, this is a PhD project that also involves undergrads, research assistants to code data sets and so forth. Funding for this fell short, or there's not enough funding for this, but it's required, and so forth. I mean, but this kind of narrative must be there. Otherwise, yeah, I would question, why do you need to have research assistants for your PhD? Typically, this is what you do individually, full-time or part-time, but not with assistants. Sometimes there may be cases where research assistants can help, but then the case needs to be made for this, I would say.
Okay.
I'm not sure, Holly, Samson, what do you think?
Yeah, I was checking the website, and I think that we've always approached this as if it's justified as necessary for the completion of the project, that this is allowable, because we have funded things like survey costs, interview costs, copy editing or proofreading, so hiring, especially if you have any indexing that you wanted to hire out. So I think that as long as it can be justified as necessary for completion, if you need RAs to help with coding or things, my understanding is that we do take a very broad allowance for what can be included.
Yeah.
So
fair enough. Yeah.
Okay. Over to you, Holly. I see you have a couple of questions there.
yes, let me get because I was like jumping back and forth between the website. So there's one question that came up about the letter of intent. How detailed should the letter of intent to get the secure link? Should it just be a few sentences, or does it need to be a longer, comprehensive document like a formal letter? And then there's another one from the same person, but I think just addressing that is good.
So the letter of intent has to be a file that you attach to your email that you send to the email that we indicated, but it does not have to have any substantive content, except that you intend, you express your intention to submit for this fellowship, and what your affiliation is and what your full name is. But you don't need to go into the details how you think you're eligible and all of that. That comes later.
Okay. And then from this person, about additional funding, would TA or ships from our university count as that additional funding, or are we only talking about external funding? My understanding I will just sort of jump in here is like, my understanding is that counts as all funding counts as additional funding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's important also. Also from your home institution, any kind of support you get would also count. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's it for the webinar chat. I think that most of the questions may be on the Q&A.
All right, from the
Okay, good.
Q&A, I don't know if you'll be able to respond to this. Someone says, what's the highest number of students who have been awarded the fellowship in a given year, and how much was disbursed in total? Just asking in order to get a feel of how distinct this fellowship is from other academic associations, or this is from other academic associations.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, Holly, correct me. I think it's been 10 to 11 fellowships that have been awarded last year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that. There's also limited budget for this, so it's not unlimited, which really means if we get lots and lots of applications, then of course it becomes harder to find the best ones. Yeah, the ones that are most eligible.
Okay.
Yeah, we are on a fixed budget from the ISA, and I think the years that we've given more have been years where we had a few people who had requested less than the 5,000, and so we were able to split the funds that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Does unemployment income count as additional funding?
But this is a source of income, a source of funding. So you should indicate that and then place this in your budget. Basically, this is income that you have, and then you have expenses and expenses that you plan for your PhD and so forth. So I think it's part of the narrative. Should be part of that. Yeah.
And to contextualize it, especially if it can be used, for instance, to demonstrate either the shortfall or the financial need for the dissertation completion fellowship. As the presentation has been made, the fellowship amount can be used to do a number of things that are actually supposed to help you complete it. So the thing is the narrative to just provide as much information as possible within that budgetary narrative.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think unemployment income is weighed the same way as funding from your institution, since especially if it's government funded, it does. I think Sam was hitting on that it communicates to us that there is a lack of support from your professional, I guess, financial support networks. So.
Okay.
A non-funding related question is, where should we indicate our underrepresented status in the application? Should this be included in the statement of financial need or in a separate section for it?
So this, I mean, you have your CV, so that's where it could feature or could become transparent, and then probably, yeah, most likely in the statement on financial support and the financial need statement, possibly also in the narrative budget. So yeah, there's no specific document that is just about this, but it would or might feature in several of the documents.
You could also ask your letter writer to address that as well, to do some additional context.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Over to you, Holly.
Okay, so I think this also was on the Q&A. Do recipients have to declare they received funding from ISA in their thesis or the publication thereof? So I think that my understanding of this question, and feel free to whoever's in the chat to clarify this, is that whenever they're publishing their thesis, would they include recognition from ISA as a funding source? And that's actually something I don't know if we have a formal rule on, but I think it would be good practice.
It will be good practice. I mean, you're supposed to write a report later and send this to the committee chair to say what you did with the funding. Yeah, I think it will be ethical to mention this in the thesis. If there's a section where you can have these kinds of acknowledgements to acknowledge the funding, which contributed to it. Of course, it didn't do this alone, but it contributed to your dissertation. Yeah, it would make sense. Maybe that's something that should be pointed out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it would just be, while this may not be a requirement for our dissertation, I think that most academic institutions do have a expectation that you should be transparent on research support funds in some way. And so whatever your institution's rules about that in publications, I think that would be, it would behoove you to include that when you do either submit your thesis to your college or institution or publish it as a separate book in, for instance, the forward or something.
Yeah, let me just highlight also, maybe there will be a few questions coming up as you prepare your materials. When you go to the call for applications subpage on the ISA website, you can see, for one, the fellowship at isanet.org email. That's where you send your letter of intent, your email, with the attachment, the letter of intent. And below it, there's also my contact email as chair of the committee. If you have questions about this process, you can reach out. And there's also, I think, yeah, that's it. These two emails are on the call, basically. If any questions come up, please feel free to reach out to us or members of the committee, and we try to address this. So there's still plenty of time till September, and hopefully everything can be addressed so that you can prepare your materials. Great. Okay. Thank you all for being here, taking part, and being interested in the fellowship program. We look forward to your questions, also your applications and submissions, and to assessing them. Also on behalf of those members of the committee who couldn't be here. Thank you all, and just stay in touch if you have questions in the future. Bye-bye.